Okay. Don't want any of the profound wisdom I'm about to share to go unrecorded for posterity. So, as I mentioned, feel free to chime in, to interrupt me, to unmute. I think there's enough of you that it won't be a traffic situation. So, or I have the chat open if you have any questions along the way, comments. I want to keep this interactive too. I have been working in the social impact sector for several decades now, and as you can imagine, have responded and drafted my share of RFPs. And um, I don't know exactly which one this in the past months, but one of them we got an RFP, and it was sort of, I guess, the straw that broke the camel's back. And I said, okay, we got to do something about this. And so I sat down and I typed up all my sort of like thoughts on RFPs, and it was a 20 item list. So I'm gonna hopefully have parsed that list, and we'll make this entertaining and engaging and interactive, and not just a rant, if you will. I'll try to keep it hopefully constructive and useful, and hopefully we can co-generate some information too. I have no qualms that this is not the last word on RFPs. There's very few resources out there I found in terms of like the history of them and how to write them really well. And there's just not a lot out there. It's just kind of like one of those things where people tend to, oh, I have to write an RFP, and they Google RFPs and they get other RFPs and they kind of patch them together. And I think we need to maybe take a step back and sort of think about this a little bit more strategically. And that's what we're going to try to do today. So a lot of the issues I have with RFPs, and Janae and I are consultants. We'll talk about this, what we do in a second. So we are on the we have both written them and issued them, but we're more on in the last couple of years, and particularly have been more on the responding side. So some of the problems that I've identified that sort of got me sort of interested in this and motivated me to dig into it more in depth is lack of budget, or RFPs that are poorly defined the project. That in a way kind of repel you. You read them and go, oh, I want nothing to do with this. And for whatever reason, we'll talk more about that. The response requires lots of time. It's like, okay, I'm going to put a lot of time in this. And then you realize there's a very low chance of success because 100 other people are putting a lot of time into this. Or you look at it and you go, wow, it just doesn't seem like what they want is the right approach for the right problem. We just did a webinar a couple of weeks ago on strategic planning, and a lot of times we find and we see people like, oh, we need a strategic plan. And when you start digging into that a little bit, you kind of realize like, well, yeah, you may need a strategic plan, but there's a couple other things you need as well. And they're kind of using a strategic plan as kind of a band-aid for a bunch of other things. So it can be that you can issue an RFP for the wrong approach as well. And again, we'll dig into this more. This is just a little warm up. So because there's a smaller group, maybe folks can unmute as they feel comfortable. What's been your experience in terms of either drafting them, distributing them, reviewing, responding? Has it been good? Has it like, oh, I love writing RFPs. I love reviewing them. It always goes super smoothly. I have no idea what I'm doing, or I've written 100 of them. I'm curious, folks, if you just want to unmute and share just a sentence or two about your experience with them.
It's always somehow challenging to write them, and sometimes you think you have things too clear in your mind, and then they don't necessarily translate that clearly to others. And it's hard also then you over-explain and then you make them too long.
Yes, agreed. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Those things can be bouncing in your head, right? And then when you have to try to explain it to someone else, it can be a real challenge. Absolutely. Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's always this balance. I've written them too as a consultant previously, so also aware of the just the whole process is arduous, right? It's hard for everybody on the receiving side, on the issuer side. I'm in the middle of 2 of them right now, and I'm just like, ooh, I did not plan plenty of time to have kind of these one-off conversations on everybody that gets it and what they want to know and what I didn't include. And at the same time, I think there's this balance of how much, to your point around we don't have the right solution defined or the budget. Some cases it's because we don't necessarily know what we need or what the options are, right? And some of that comes with experience, but also what people think they need and what they actually need aren't always explicit, nor in some cases they don't want to actually focus on what they need. So there's this weird Like, do I want to work on this work? Yeah, to your point. I think I've
Yes,
experienced all of
yes,
it.
yes, and yes. Absolutely. Thanks. And we'll talk about some of those things too, Heidi, in terms of like, people really not knowing what they need. And that's a normal thing. It's a very normal, and I think people feel embarrassed or ashamed or whatever. Is like that when you're sort of have zero distance perspective because you're in the work, right? It's very hard to have that outside perspective and have a clear thing, but we have some thoughts on that. In addition to like what to focus on in RFP and how to really kind of think about what you want to communicate when you should communicate. We'll talk a little bit about that too. Thanks for that. Anyone else want a good experience, bad experiences, love them, hate them, reviewing them, how to distribute them? Any thoughts? Joyce, are you an RFP aficionado, or are you like I have to do it if someone forces me to?
Pretty much I get forced to do it, and I hate it because, especially like the most recent thing I did, I was looking for a new HR platform, and unfortunately well, we've got to do an RFP, and I'm like, I know what solutions I want to look at. I don't want to go through this whole process of doing this RFP when I know I'm going to focus over here. But
Mm,
sometimes organizations put these constraints on you where it's like, oh no, you've got to do an RFP or you've got to do this. And so it just becomes a headache for me at doing it and then writing it, just like someone else said. Sometimes I don't know what I want. I know I need this, but I'm looking for ideals about, hey, tell me how I can do this better. And it's just so much easier when you're not in that confined RFP type
yeah.
transaction. So yeah.
I totally appreciate that, and also, having RFPs be kind of mandated depending on what environment you work in. And if you're working in a governmental environment or something where it's like, okay, we have to do this because it's kind of legal constraints. I totally get that. Yeah, and Heidi, to your point, and like, well, getting ideas from different people, and yeah, we'll talk about all of these things. These are really good warm up ideas and observations. So, Jess, Lauren, or Amy, anything else you want to add? Hey, Lauren.
I echo what Gloria Mar said. I tend to overcomplicate things, and then at the end, it's like I don't know where I started because I just suddenly have 10 pages of thoughts dumped onto a Word doc.
All right. By the end of this, we will hopefully clarify where to start and hopefully give some really good, like, solid parameters that way. This is super helpful because I can focus on a lot of different things, but I'm hearing some themes emerge that we can really kind of drill down to and focus. So thanks for sharing that, Jess. Hey, Lauren.
Hi, I joined
Uh,
late, so I'm not sure what was already said, but
That's okay.
I guess my immediate reaction to the prompts on the screen, I'm mostly coming from the lens of crafting RFPs.
As we know.
Yeah. And so just making sure that we're requesting the right information from folks that actually gets us what we need for the project can sometimes be challenging.
Mhm.
And then in terms of reviewing the responses, creating like a clear criteria because we tend to put together committees to help us select folks, whether it's a consultant or it's a grantee, making sure those criteria are clear and match what is in the RFP has been a challenge, especially on the grant making side.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Thanks, Lauren. So Lauren's a friend of Janae and I, and Lauren and I worked together as I was a consultant and she was the client, and we had a good time. She works for COAC here in Detroit, if people know COAC. Amy, anything you want to add? Don't need to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm primarily a responder to RFPs, and one of the things that I find really irritating is when organizations do not put a budget range for the services that they're looking for. And it's like, I can tell you what I would charge for the services, but it's helpful because I'm a grant writer.
Mm-hmm.
So
I come from the same space with grants where I'm like, tell me what the range of the grants that you're making are. I don't want to request $100,000. I don't want to present $100,000 budget if you're only giving away $50,000 grants.
Yeah. And right, there's always a budget. There's always a budget. I have never been in
It's
this.
the same thing with hiring for jobs, right? They
Yep.
don't list the salary range in the job post. It just
Yep.
wastes everybody's time.
Yep. 100%. 100%. I share that pet peeve 100%. And because you don't know what to aim for. And a lot of times we can scale what we do. Yeah, we have the Cadillac version and we have the Buick. We're in Detroit. I have to use car metaphors. You have the fancy car. You have the fancy car version. Like if you have the resources, this is the best way to do it. But we live in the reality, right? It's people don't have the resources always to do it the best way. So tell me what you can do, and I'll tell you, as much as I can give you for what you
Right.
have.
The other thing that kind of bothers me is some RFPs are so prescriptive that it's like there's no room for collaboration in the design of the project itself.
Yep.
And so, as consultants, you're paying us for our expertise and for our process and methodology. And if you're just going to detail every step of the process the way that you think it should be, which most organizations that are putting out RFPs don't actually know exactly what they need, and they certainly don't have all of the information on all of the ways to skin a cat. I find that it can be really difficult to respond to RFPs that are so prescriptive. Like if they ask us to describe our approach, but they've already outlined the approach that they want to take, well, then why am I submitting a response to your RFP?
You guys are going to make my job easy. 100% agree. And I'll talk about a little bit. We'll touch on that too, and what to do instead, right? You're ostensibly you're seeking somebody. If you're looking for a consultant, you're seeking someone who has the expertise, and part of that expertise is having a process, whether it's doing a strategic plan or a landscape review or strategy, whatever the case may be. And I always say, like, well, if you're going to dictate the process, just hire a temp and have them do your process. And also it's asking, I know my process. I know our process really well because I've done it, many, many, many times, and I know where I have to pay attention and whatnot. So, I don't want to use someone else's process. Hey, Tracy, welcome. We're just getting started here and just having a little convo. So, where are you calling in from?
Sorry, I'm running late. I'm
No
calling
worries.
in from South Lyon.
Oh, okay. Nice. Welcome. We're just talking about people's issues with RFPs, and now we're going to kind of turn into kind of a little bit of, I'll give an overview in a second. I think the first question is, why does this matter? And it's like, it's your organization's reputation, right? When you issue an RFP, you're putting something out in the world and you're requesting something out in the world. It's a matter of using resources to their highest purpose, both your time and your money. It's about doing the project and making sure you have a good fit and the right personnel and the right expertise for your project, which all means it's about impact, right? And that's what Janae and I really care about, is helping organizations maximize the impact they have, positive impact they have with the resources they have. And that's kind of why this matters to us and why we've been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks. And so in terms of who we are, Janae, do you want to do a quick intro of yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. From Hunt Street Station in Detroit. My name is Janae Gilmore. And yeah, I started my career in the nonprofit sector quite a few years ago, working at a Detroit-based organization. I am originally from the city of Detroit. And then a couple of years ago, Peter and I launched Foresight Collective, and I am so excited that you're here for this webinar, but just to be doing this webinar, because let me tell you, this is one of Peter's soapbox issues. I'm so glad that he now has the opportunity to share and engage some folks around this, because our goal is really not just to work on projects, but to really impact our sector and help us be able to create the change that we all want to see in the world. So,
yeah, Thanks, Janae. So I'm Peter Nicholson. I'm actually about 25 feet away from Janae at the moment in Hunt Street Station. I grew up in the Detroit area, but I am currently based and have been based for 2 decades in Chicago. So I go back and forth between Chicago and Detroit. We work in projects in both places and other places as well. I've been in the social impact design, systems thinking, yada yada sector for about 25 years now and have worked on projects across a very wide spectrum of topics. In particular, working with collaboratives, working on sort of philanthropic strategy, working on organizational development. Again, kind of issue agnostic. I've worked on everything from energy to food to land conservation, et cetera, et cetera. So, and really enjoy the diversity of topics that I've touched on, helping a lot of really great organizations. And Janae and I have been working together for about 2 years now. So that's who we are. And yes, this is one of my soapbox issues, and I'm going to be constructive. I'm going to be positive, even though sometimes as it sounds like it's a shared experience. RFPs drive us all crazy in different ways. So hopefully we can some of these ideas and things that we can generate together can help alleviate some of that. So quick just agenda in terms of structuring this conversation. I hope it's a conversation. I want to touch a little bit about history of RFPs really briefly, just so we can because I was like, where did these things come from? Like they've always been around, and I tried to find some information. What's their purpose? Like, what's their real purpose, right? And what are some of those pitfalls? What are some alternatives? And then both in terms of risk reduction is also, but what can we, if we're going to issue RFPs, what are some things that we can do, acknowledging that perhaps the underlying, and I'll talk about this in a moment, the underlying purpose of an RFP is a risk reduction process. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So if that's the case, what are some things that we can do and that we should be aware of when writing RFPs? Yeah. So history, just very briefly, the history, there's not a lot of resources out there. I sort of dug around the internet and whatnot, but prior to the late 1880s of industrialism and standardized production and whatnot, it was pure recommendations and limited competition and very relational based, and RFPs weren't really a thing because A, things weren't standardized enough to compare them against each other. B, you didn't have a lot of choices. And C, there wasn't a way to communicate and distribute an RFP very widely, very easily, very economically. 1880s, things started to change. Things, standardized production. You had, widgets compared to widgets. They had bids in, things, notices in newspapers and trade publications, and RFPs kind of started emerging around here as a way of comparing kind of like, as you had multiple choices and multiple vendors, comparing kind of like things with like things. And then that just as the communication technologies kind of expanded, right? RFPs started going more widely. Those of us of a certain age know what a fax machine is. It's funny to know and how central they used to be in terms of distribution. Thank you, Tracy. I'm not the only one that's of a certain age. And government agencies in terms of like, hey, adopted RFPs to kind of increase transparency and fairly evaluate contractors. And then social media has just put everything on steroids. We'll talk about LinkedIn in a minute. I'm curious to get your thoughts about distributing RFPs on LinkedIn. I'm curious about that. But the consistent goal is really better sourcing and comparison. But, and this is the big but, of kind of well and easily defined items. And so we have to think about like, okay, this sort of literary, genre, if you want to call it that, has kind of emerged, but it's kind of been started being applied outside of like commodities to services. And the fit to me has never been like a great one. And I think that's what causes sort of fundamental consternation is we're using a medium that really wasn't built for the kind of use that a lot of us tend to give it. Let me stop. And I don't know much more. There's RFPs as kind of this amorphous thing. It's so funny for something that's so prevalent that there's so little like history in terms of diving into it. But it really was something like industrialism, standardization, comparing, kind of issuing for bids on commodities. It seems is where they originally came from. Any questions on the history? I can do my best to answer. So what's the purpose, right? Why issue an RFP? And I think we kind of all know this, but like, what's the purpose below the purpose? And it's really about, to me, the fundamental purpose is risk reduction. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. So it's about, hey, scanning for services and approaches, things that people have already mentioned. It's about finding new vendors and consultants. It's about comparing those things to each other, and it's about, ostensibly contracting and hiring someone. Or on the other side of it, Lauren's side of it, it's about issuing an opportunity for grant funding and finding the people that have projects that best fit the parameters for that grant kind of thing. So it has this, and when you're matchmaking, when you're applying for a job, the way I see it, it's really a matter of like reducing the risk beneath a certain threshold that you feel comfortable moving forward. And we'll talk a little bit about risk reduction in a minute. But again, there's some caveats to this purpose. Is thinking about, okay, we're doing risk reduction, but are we talking about commodities or are we talking about services, as I mentioned before, right? And then also one of the things that Janae and I really tried to incorporate, and it's just, I think, our personalities, is that we're very relational, right? We keep in touch with our clients and our friends, oftentimes who are become our clients, or vice versa. Whether we have work with them or business with them or not, we're very relational that way. We're not very transactional in terms of how we operate and how we relate to folks. So RFPs tend to be supporting more transactional relationships. So that's something to think about. And so fundamentally, I think we have to ask ourselves, hey, is this RFP the best way to go? And sometimes you have to go. I appreciate what was shared before, what Joyce shared in terms of like, hey, sometimes you have to do it because higher ups and power structures are telling us to do it. So sometimes you have to do it. But I think a lot of times there's other alternatives, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Anyone else have any thoughts on the purpose of RFPs? Does this reverberate, this risk reduction? That's how it feels in terms of, I do some career advising. I'm always telling people it's fundamentally about reducing the risk of hiring you and what you can do about that. And I'll share some of those strategies as they pertain to RFPs. Tracy, you're nodding your head. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you because they've got a reputation. They've got to spend some, like if it's a foundation, they have X number of dollars that they need to get out there on the street, or if it's government, X numbers of dollars out on the street, and they're going to report on that and be able to say, oh, we invested in this and this and this and this, and they want to make sure that that reputation bar is very high. So they want to make sure they're giving money to organizations that can manage the money, spend the money, and reflect well on them. So it's all about risk reduction. I totally agree.
Yeah. Lauren, I'm curious because you do both consultants and grant RFPs. Does this reverberate this fundamental purpose that you're trying to reduce risk, trying to find the right match?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of work that impacts community, so we definitely want to make sure that the people we're selecting are, I guess, from the grant's perspective, are representative of the community. So we're definitely screening for that, and then on the consultant side, similarly wanting people who know how to work within the community, are reflective of the community, won't do harm to the community, which also goes back to making sure that our organization maintains their good reputation for good work. So yeah, that definitely resonates.
Can I ask a question, Lauren? In terms of if you had two, whether it's a grant proposal or consultant proposal, if you had two of them and they were similar in terms of cost and just say experience, but you worked with one before, would you be more inclined to go with the people that you work with before, or like, hey, let's try something new?
Um, I think that's where our selection process comes in. So we tend to try to have people external from our organization that we have relationships with also review. And we tend to have a scoring criteria, and then we rely on where we land with those scores to end up making the final decision. But I can say that we definitely do try to like circulate through because we've got a wide pool of providers in the Detroit area and even a lot of national folks who do work in Detroit. So we may be intentional about like, hey, we've worked with this group a couple times. Let's give someone else a try. They meet all the criteria. It'll bring a fresh perspective, whatever. So that's definitely something we have done.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that perspective. Yeah. Anyone else? Any thoughts on the purpose of these, the fundamental purpose? Yeah, go ahead, Gloria.
I think it's important to have RFPs also because when you've been, in our case, some of our funding comes from the state, and because of transparency and as you said, there's risk. You must do an RFP. You must at least present 3 proposals and so on. And also, as what you were saying resonated with me about relationally. Yes, we do have a lot of people that we have closer relationship with and we would prefer to work with. But because also of transparency, we always try to have a committee or other external reviewers to help us not only, especially when it's grant giving, assess the proposals on the projects. So it's not only us being biased.
Nice. And one of the things I want to do later on when I talk about risk reduction is just talk a little bit about, what are those factors that potentially influence our decisions, because there's some very specific things that tend to do that. The other, Janae Gilmore, you want to say? Sorry, who's unmuted there? Sorry, I forget your name. You just joined. That's okay. Anyone else want to share anything on purpose? So what I'm hearing is like, hey, the purpose is to find vendors. What I'm also hearing is like, hey, some folks do have sort of external review processes that evaluate the risk of proposals, and so it's not sort of this people issuing it who are necessarily reviewing them. Jess, did you want to say something?
No, I agree.
Okay.
I agree. I'm just Gloria Mar. I'm on Gloria Mar's team. So yeah,
Okay.
Our grant funding says that we have to issue RFPs, and I think that
does it say how broadly do you have to broadcast them? I'm just curious because this is a conversation I'm curious to have with folks about sharing them on LinkedIn.
We usually put them on our webpage, but we also share them on LinkedIn, and depending on so we have RFPs to hire contractors, right? Or for some construction we're doing, but we also issue RFPs to re-grant funding. Especially, yes, and we tend also to put it on LinkedIn, but also on some other local resources to put it out there for people, to grantees and so on. And sometimes we also send direct emails as well. Nice.
Sounds like you're very thorough that way. That's great. I am curious though, a conversation I want to have in a second, I'll plant the seed now, is broadcasting an RFP as broadly as possible the best thing to do? And I'm just going to leave that out there and we'll circle back to that conversation in a minute, but I just wanted to plant that seed. So some of the pitfalls to think about, if you're writing RFPs, you're issuing RFPs, whatever the case may be, these are some things that I've experienced and I've seen, and I can give you sort of anecdotes for each and every one of them. I'm curious, again, we've talked about some at the very beginning. If there's some that this list makes you think of that it's not on this list, I'd love to know those. I'll just quickly go over these 7 that came to me. An unrealistic budget, and it's often not the person's fault. Like we want all of this work and this is the budget we have. And I think sometimes it's just folks don't know how long things take, right? Those of us on the consulting side, we have a pretty good sense of like, okay, a one-on-one interview for a landscape scan takes, an hour and a half in terms of planning it, executing it, and doing it. And it's like, okay, we want 20 one-on-one interviews and we have, very little money. And it's just like, it doesn't fit. And so a lot of times I've seen these, we want this big strategic plan, and they give you the whole strategic planning process. And then it's like a very sort of modest budget. And of course, different consultants have different levels, but I think it's a good idea to try to proof test before you send out an RFP. If you are unsure about, hey, the scope and the fee, are these in alignment? Find a consultant that that's not going to respond, or that's not eligible to respond, or that wouldn't be interested. But just hey, can I proof test this? Or a colleague that has issued RFPs before, or works with consultants before, and kind of proof test your budget. can be a helpful thing to do. I won't say much about ambitious schedule, whether it's like issuing an RFP and we want responses in a week. And yes, I have seen that. Or like issuing an RFP and we have this big project and we want it done in 3 months. And you look at it like, again, it's like, wow, that's going to take a lot longer. I just know that it's, yeah, I can try to get it done in 3 months, but scheduling meetings and all that kind of stuff. So the overly ambitious schedule. And I think a lot of times schedules are best co-created with the consultant so they can have some say in that. So leaving that open, say, hey, we'd like to get this done in 3 to 6 months or whatever the case may be, but co-creating the schedule and not overly stipulating that, I think is a best practice, at least in my opinion, because you don't know what other engagements your particular consultant might have or whatever the case may be. And also giving a little bit of time for folks to respond. At the same time, I've also seen like issuing an RFP and the responses aren't due for 3 months and you totally forget about it. And so you have to make sure you put it on your calendar. I've seen that as well. This came up in some of the comments that you shared earlier on is the overly detailed. And it's like, okay, we're going to spell everything out. And again, if you're hiring a consultant, I'm talking about consultant RFPs, there's some different ways around that, and then that's not necessarily you can say, hey, we think it should have this, or we'd like it to have these elements. But I never found with issuing an RFP that you need to spell out your process. So if that's something you like, oh, I don't know how we'd go about doing this, that's okay. That's why you're hiring someone who does. And same thing, I think if you're issuing an RFP for grants, it's like, hey, give us, have them put the timeline in there. Hey, this needs to get done, and we think we can do X in 6 to 8 months. This is number 4 is probably the most, and this is something that I think is a theme for anyone who issues RFPs. And I'll explain what I mean by this. Kind of the most profound one, and the one that really made me stop and think we got to really kind of rethink RFPs and find a better way. What I mean by all solution is that our brains tend to jump from problem to solution really fast. And to the point where we don't really even acknowledge the problem. We need a strategic plan. We need a landscape review. We need this. We need this. And so we see RFPs that are like asking for a solution. And Janae and I are happy to like entertain that, but we really are, we're problem solvers. We're really good problem solvers, and we have expertise in solving different kinds of problems and understanding different kinds of problems. And so those folks are asking, like, where to start with an RFP, and I'll mention this a little bit later too. Start with the problem. What problem are you trying to solve? And what outcome do you hope to get? And really, I think very, very, very few RFPs really talk about the problem. They talk about what their vision is, and we want to do this, and we want to solve that, and we blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, but you're doing this ostensibly because you have some kind of challenge that you've encountered that you need some help with. And so really focusing on understanding that problem and saying, hey, we think here's our problem, here's the outcome that we like, and we think that this could be solved via, a strategic plan or whatever the case may be. But I just see a lot of 90% of the RFPs are all solution, and it's difficult because I want to help try to solve your problem, but it's not acknowledged. And again, someone also mentioned a lot of folks don't want to look at that side of things. They just want to kind of jump to solution. Sometimes I should put wrong in quotation marks, but we just did a webinar on alternatives to strategic planning. Sometimes it's the wrong solution. A strategic plan isn't going to solve it. I've done this a lot. I have gray hair for a reason. I have the scars to show it. I have a lot of experience, and I know what a strategic plan will do and what it won't do. And I see a lot of times strategic plans used to try to fix organizational development issues. And it's not, I have a friend right now, and she's the new ED of an entity in Chicago, and she wants to change the culture there. And she's like, I'm doing the strategic plan. I just sort of like, I was like, that's a component to it. I hope your effort doesn't begin and end with that strategic plan, because it's not going to work in terms of inflecting the culture at the organization that you're now the head of. So sometimes it's the wrong solution. It's asking for the wrong solution. or a solution that maybe you want to proof check again with some colleagues. Hey, do you think this is the right thing before issuing an RFP for it? Window shopping. So I've also heard this recently. I didn't know what I wanted, so we just issued an RFP and then we just kind of went through them and figured out what we wanted. And I guess that's fair game. It's kind of using other people's labor to kind of do your own work. Some ethical issues I have with kind of the window shopping method, and you don't know that that's what the client's doing. And it just further from the responder's point of view, it just further reduces the likelihood of getting selected if that's the case. Again, have some conversations with colleagues, find more information, and then really narrow down what you're looking for. What do people think about broadcasting RFPs on LinkedIn? And it's sort of circling back to that question. Is it a good thing to get an RFP in front of the most people? Is that a worthy goal, or should there be a different way about going about things? Curious for people's thoughts on that, because I've read about, and I found out about RFPs on LinkedIn, but I'm becoming a very anti-LinkedIn RFP person. But I'm curious what other people think. Any thoughts? Jess, you have a puzzled look on your face.
Yeah, I think for fairness, I think like to be as unbiased as possible, post it on LinkedIn, post it on the website, but then targeted emails inviting people to apply or to submit a proposal. I think there's like a both things should get done to get the proposals that you'd like.
So if it takes someone 3 hours to write a proposal, and you're asking for the most proposals possible, is that fair?
I think that I mean I think at Beam we often have an email address or a meeting link so that if you have questions for something on it, then that meeting or email can kind of figure out if the organization that's applying can decide whether or not they're the right fit, I think.
I appreciate your perspective. When I get to alternatives, I'll
Okay.
maybe suggest a thing or two. But thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your honesty, and I appreciate it. So, anybody else want to chime in on this topic?
Hi,
Lenore.
Peter. That's Lenore. Sorry I was late. I was on another call.
That's all right.
I do think that there is always the piece about transparency of being open. If you're not really going to be open, you shouldn't put it up there. But if you are really going to look at everything that comes through, and consider it, that's the way that we can kind of say it's a public notice, right? And be available. But if you don't have those restrictions, or you don't have to, or you're not really going to be open, then you shouldn't do it.
I'd add one more thing to that, maybe Lenore, and see if you agree with this. If you don't have the capacity to at least acknowledge receipt of the proposals and also acknowledge that you've denied them, you shouldn't do it if you do not have that administrative capacity. I think that's the bare minimum. I don't know if you think differently of that, or.
No, that's fair.
Okay. I think it's the worst that, when you're applying for a job, I'm hearing this a lot lately, right? And for the last couple of years, in fact, is people apply to jobs and you don't know if they got your resume, that you don't know if they've looked at it. You don't know if you're lucky, you get a rejection letter, 2 weeks, 5 months, 6 months. I've heard all sorts of crazy stories. And people try to follow up and they can't get through to anybody. And, and then people keep broadcasting on LinkedIn. Oh, there's an organization that Lenore and I know and love that Lenore used to work at, and has been broadcasting the same 2 or 3 jobs on LinkedIn for like several weeks now. And I'm sure they're going to get hundreds of responses. And I wonder if they have the administrative capacity to treat those people with kind of, with dignity. I don't know. Lauren, how about you, Lauren? Any thoughts on distributing via LinkedIn? And I know there's a difference between and Lenore works for, I know Lenore's a friend and she works for a foundation. So Lauren, how about you? And in terms of maybe consultants versus grant proposals?
Yeah. I think it depends. For the expertise that we may be looking for a consultant, I mean, to be fair, we have a directory that Janae all knows all about, of service providers. So we kind of have a feel for like who may have expertise of X, Y, and Z thing that we're looking for, and whether it needs to be a wider net that we're casting or not. I would say for grants, I think we're in a space where we have a finite amount of funds that go out, which means a finite number of folks that we can award. It might not necessarily make the most sense to post things on LinkedIn and broadcast widely, because then we're getting way too many applicants than we know we can grant. So that's something we're always struggling with. We obviously want people to be aware of opportunities that they might not know about. So want to use those different channels that people are plugged into, but then also struggling to know if we broadcast so widely, then there are going to be a lot of people that end up spending a lot of time and are disappointed. So we're trying to create a balance there for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just want to effort that, my issue is just to be aware that how much time your RFP takes to respond to, and then when you broadcast it widely, you're asking people to do a lot of people to do a lot of labor. And so, what's the solution? What do you do instead? Glad you asked. And let me just say, anyone else have any other pitfalls before I move on to some alternatives to RFPs before we talk about some things to think about when you're writing them? Anybody else? Other pitfalls I haven't
Yeah.
mentioned here? Yeah, go ahead, Janae.
So Peter, and we talked about this earlier, consultants who won't even bother applying for an open call RFP. And these are the more experienced folks, maybe the people who from whom you'd most be excited to get a response, who they just won't bother because they think it's a waste of time with, potentially hundreds of other applicants coming in. So I think from the issuer side, that's also something to take into consideration. Who are you putting off by issuing the open call RFP?
Yeah. Thanks, Janae. Anybody else? Any pitfalls? So, what can you do instead? So, this is the alternatives, and then we'll talk about to wrap up in the next 11 minutes. We'll spend a little time on these alternatives, and then we'll talk about, hey, well, here's some things to think about in terms of writing RFPs, and things that may be happening mentally as you go through it. But some alternatives is to develop relationships, proactively develop relationships with consultants and partners, or potential partners, right? Again, Janae and I, just by our natures and who we are very relational, and we keep up with folks and we try to understand what's going on. And, we find that as part of our business development, whether they have a project for us or not. And that's something we really enjoy doing. And we're going to do it tomorrow. If you're in Detroit, a little plug, tomorrow at noon here in Hunt Street, we're having just hey, come out and hang out with us, have lunch with us. Bring your brown bag, and we'll just hang out and have a conversation. We did this a month or two ago and had a really nice conversation. So if you're in Detroit, little plug, we're going to open our door here in Hunt Street and just have lunch with folks, whoever wants to swing by. So that's one thing to do. I know it takes time and whatever, but it's something that you can kind of start building and working into your your workflow. And it's also a fun way to find out what's going on. And consultants work with a lot of different folks and tend to have a lot of different perspectives, just like people who work for foundations tend to have a very broad perspective. I enjoy talking to them because they're looking at a whole landscape at once, versus a lot of folks where we're just kind of focused on one thing. And if you're, here's, I think, with regard to equity, and I hear that loud and clear, and we take that very seriously. One of the things about equity is you got to make an effort, and just broadcasting it to me does not check off the equity box. And because there can be all kinds of implicit bias and things written into your RFP, I think seeking referrals from diverse colleagues, you got to get outside of your own kind of echo chamber. Those people that look, and work and, like you. And if you're interested in like true equity, hey, find those other sources of people that can find, other opportunities for you in terms of consultants. Janae and Lauren worked on a consultant database here in Detroit called Dovetail. But it's a way of finding, if you really want diversity, you've got to, I think, make a little extra effort in doing that. Getting referrals can be a really useful thing, and inviting, hey, doing your research and, finding one or two new, entities and inviting them to risk run. So here's my thing in terms of, Jess, what we were talking about, what to do instead of an RFP that take a lot of time to respond to. Just do a quick RFQ and RFI, request for information. Let me send you my 2-pager, right? That has information that I can put down, and it takes me 30 minutes instead of 3 hours to respond to an RFP, so that you can look at it and go, oh, you know what? This really isn't a good match. Don't waste your time, right? And so I've only put in 15 to 30 minutes versus 3 hours is being, some RFPs, that's being like, we've worked on RFPs sometimes for multiple days, because they're so complicated. But this one, I wish more people did RFQs, RFIs, requests for information, requests for qualifications, and then vetted and then invited a much smaller subsection of organizations or entities, whatever the case may be, to apply. I don't know why it's not used enough. I was on a call with a foundation in Chicago the other day. They were issuing an RFP for consultants. There was over 100 people on this information call for this consulting gig. And they refused to give a budget. Like, they absolutely refused. And someone pointedly asked them, can you? And they're like, our board, just wants the best person. And they're not, and there's always a budget, people. And they also refused to do an RFI. They had 100 people on a webinar about this RFP, and a bunch of us were like, we're out. And it was very clear. And it really, to me, negatively impacted my thought about this foundation, and happens to be in Chicago. So I think I'm emphasizing, I think that is a really great, equitable way, quick way, reduces the need. You can reduce down your field much quicker with doing an RFQ or RFI. Also, a friend of mine, the same friend that I mentioned, who became the head of this new organization, when she was doing looking for a consultant, she's like, I got three references, referrals, and I called them up and I had a conversation. I would love to have a conversation, a 30-minute conversation, and seeing if it's a fit and seeing if we vibe right, and whatever the case may be, versus a multiple, so have some conversations, call people. Consultants, we're generally, happy to talk. And also, just because we talked, we don't develop, oh, well, they called us, they must be interested. Well, they're interested to know something. That doesn't mean we're a good fit until, they have time to reflect on it. So it's not like you're building up expectation or not. And then identify, instead of focusing on the whole process, to me, it's like, think of the RFP more like a brief, both in terms of content and length, that includes a well-defined problem statement. What problem are you trying to solve, right? Most of us are problem solvers. And what's the desired outcome? And what do you think the solution and approach is to that? And then the last thing, and we talked about this before, we're building in more and more sort of an assessment phase, like, hey, you have all these things going on. Let's just build in a short, I call it phase 0.5, to assess exactly what it is, so we can do a more accurate scope than perhaps what you can do sort of bouncing around in your head. So, or just hire a consultant for a very short period of time, say, hey, can you help us? All these things are going on. We're not doing this as effectively, or something bad's happening over here. We don't quite know the source of it. Could you just come in and kind of do an assessment? Again, for us at least, we would be happy to do that for an organization, whether that leads to a longer engagement or not. Again, you can set up that expectation in advance. So again, circling back, RFPs are about, just like hiring someone, it's about risk reduction, right? And risk is fundamentally about like this sense of uncertainty that we have and unknowing. And it goes into our really the old part of our brains that are wired for survival, right? Risk is about survival. Risk is like, okay, I don't want that dinosaur to eat me, right? It goes that far back. And so we're kind of wired this way. And I think the first thing to realize is that our brains are neurologically wired to avoid risk, and so in terms of, and that's functional, I think, in terms of this process. And so there's things that you can do, and I've listed here, I won't go over each one here for the sake of time, but have a look at, these are the things that tend to help us reduce risk. in particular in terms of a transaction like hiring a consultant or in terms of also finding a grantee, right? And it comes down to familiarity, trust, empathy, these kind, and the things that will help us develop those things. These first five to me, and again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I listen a lot to Hidden Brain, and I have a friend who is a neuroscientist. These five are the most powerful influences that we have in terms of risk reduction, because they give us the greatest sense of familiarity. It removes the unknown. And so if you're looking for a job, if you're looking for whatever the case may be, these are the first, and you're thinking about RFPs, think about, okay, have we worked together before? That's going to bias you automatically to somebody. And it's not a good thing or bad thing. I don't mean to imply that these are good things or bad things, but these are just things to think about as you're thinking about your process. And I like the folks say, oh, we write the RFP, but we don't assess it. That's a really interesting, and I think potentially an effective way to go about it, an equitable way to go about it. Someone referred you to this person. They look like you, they think like you, they act like you, they were educated like you. Again, there's that identification. And then you vibe. And Janae and I are talking, well, what's the difference between identification and vibing? Well, someone can look and act and think like me, but I still don't like them, right? Or something turns me off about them. So I don't know what else to call it. It's like you're comfortable in it and it's familiar with them in terms of vibing. But these other things are the things that I find the first five, you really have not a lot of control of when you're responding to an RFP. And the other, 8 or so, are things that oftentimes are put into an RFP, but they're not the influential things. And so my goal in sort of sharing this with you, and in terms of sharing this whole webinar with you, which we're just wrapping up, is think about these things in particular and how you can either amplify, think about which ones are in your case, when you're writing an RFP, how are we going to make a decision? What is our own risk reduction strategy? What is our own risk reduction, like what gets us to get people below that threshold? I have done an informal survey for the last year or two, and I have asked people who have issued RFPs and hired consultants, and 9 times out of 10, and I've probably talked to 20 people over the last year or two, 9 times out of 10, they got lots of, multiple proposals from multiple, and they broadcast it widely. Guess what they did? Guess who they hired? Number 1. Oh, we went with those first 2-3 things. Those were the most important factors in terms of hiring. 9 out of 10. It is the exception for some. In fact, I've rarely heard it. And Lauren, maybe you have a better experience because you have a different process, but it is the exception for someone to hire someone, especially a consulting relationship, right, where there's a certain kind of professional intimacy involved. It's the rare exception for someone to do it that they didn't already know. And so if we're widely broadcasting, we are, in a certain sense, we're built up to automatically discriminate, and then we engage in this long process to get folks. No worries. Thanks for joining us. We get all this information, and then we're already going to play to our biases as we go along. I am going to stop there. Any final questions, comments? Sorry, I wanted to be respectful of time, but happy to stay on if people want to talk a little bit more, a little informal. We'll also send out notes and the slides to folks and post them on if you want to share them with any colleagues. So you don't have to worry about it. We'll send all this information out and a summary out thanks to AI. Lauren, good to see you. But we're happy if anyone has any questions or comments, or we're happy to stay on and chat for a little bit. But thank you for coming. Thanks, Jess. Lenore, how did we do? Tracy, you have a comment? We're happy to talk as well.
You did good, but I got to run too. But
okay.
I think, that was my answer to your last question is who did they go with? Someone they know. And so I think that's, from a consultant's perspective, I'm sure you guys have to make sure you know a lot of people then, right? So.
Exactly. All right. Say hi to the dogs, Lenore, for me.
Bye.
Bye. Tracy, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm sorry I joined late. I was
That's
running from
okay.
another meeting in town, but
No
I
worries.
wanted to support you guys in holding this content. You know, it's funny. I was thinking about this from multiple perspectives. I was thinking about how for those of us who want to break in with foundations that we've never worked with before, I'm always teaching it's about relationships. It's about them knowing you and trusting you and that you've been in the work and you know your context and so forth. And so on the one hand, it's that. On the other hand, from an equity point of view, of course, we want new players to get into being able to do the work, right? And increasingly with AI, you guys didn't mention I don't think. Um, AI is now responsible for vetting sometimes applications. So if you went out on like LinkedIn and you got 400 responses for something and you were expecting to handle a handful, you're going to use AI to maybe screen, and that would screen out people that you might really want to have in the mix. So like I can argue both sides, I guess is what I was thinking. It was like you want program officers to be open. On the other hand, they got to know the folks who are in the work and trust and know whether they can trust that people can have the capacity to do the work, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Since
I totally appreciate that, Tracy. Yeah, it is in terms of, I mean, consulting. It's been a rare engagement that I've had that we've had that there wasn't a certain amount of like, intimacy is a lack of,
Kismet, something, yeah.
people have their thing when you got to get in there with them and you find out everything's not all rosy, and that's okay.
So
I've
true,
never been in an
right?
organization in which everything is like, perfect. And so people are very sensitive to that, and
Right.
they know that, and so I think they're very disinclined to hire somebody that they don't have that kind of like
I
familiarity
agree.
and trust with. And trust that's usually built up not over a piece of paper that I submitted, but trust built up of someone
Right.
knows me that they know. And I think that in terms of breaking in that
Agreed.
referral, it's just, again, I keep asking people thinking, hoping I was going to get a different answer. But no, no, we went with someone. Oh, I went with someone that was referred to me. Oh, we went with someone we worked with before. Oh, we went with someone that was recommended. I was like, nothing wrong with that. Let's just acknowledge that.
How do you break in?
Yeah,
Right? It's breaking
exactly.
in.
And I think that referral thing is like, well, okay, you need to, we need to refer folks. And I do that. We do that. People have referred things to Janae and I. It's like, hey, this isn't for us, but I think this may be a good
Wait
fit
a
for you.
minute.
And we do that to other people. Like, you know what? We don't do fundraising kind of thing. Hey, go talk to Tracy at Mondo, and she's really great.
Right.
Everyone kind of do that. But yeah, I just as Janae kind of hinted at, I reached my breaking point a couple of weeks ago. I at least got to get this out of my system because it's driving me crazy
I
after
don't
20 years.
I don't blame you. And so many more of us are moving into the gig economy, right?
Yeah,
And trying to build those relationships. It's costly, to spend the time meeting in person. And sometimes you meet with program officers over and over and over and over again,
yeah,
and they're picking your brain.
yep.
And you can also get that attitude. And Shanae's heard me probably talk about this. Like they're busy picking your brain. Hello, invest in us. Like you're literally saying to us where your brain there is a particular foundation that has talked to us for years about being in their brain cabinet. And it's sort of like,
Well,
then
hey, give us a
invest
little
in
bit of
us,
exactly. Give
right?
us a
Like give us
little
a piece of it.
compensation for that. Yeah,
And yeah, unfortunately, we actually did not too long ago get a piece of it, but not a big piece, and that's fine.
yeah,
But like at
yeah,
least you're compensating us for the 4 decades that I have of experience that you're tapping,
yeah.
right? Like invest
And
in us. So that's
the window shopping, as I mentioned, right, I've heard that someone actually said, "Oh, we really didn't know what we wanted, so we issued an RFP." Yeah, that took everybody how many hours to respond to? So you
so
could
many
just
hours.
leisurely like window shop as if that's, and it's like, and you don't know as a consultant, right? You don't know that's what they're doing, except maybe it's a really poorly written or RFP.
Right. Or too broad. Like, to your point, I teach networking to folks who are job hunting, and I've been
Good for
teaching it
you.
for 40 years. And
Good for
I
you.
teach them that window shopping is extremely common. HR departments issue a generic position to see what And then they'll say, we require your salary requirements. You
Yep.
must tell us
Yep.
what you request. And I'll say to people, if you see that, do not apply.
Yep.
Period. End of story. They are window shopping for how much it's going to cost them to get an engineer with this level of experience or whatever the whatever is, right? I'm like,
Yep.
it is a waste of your time. You're not going to get through the door. And 80% of jobs are found through networking. Period. End of story. That is a fact. So if you are not networking and building your relationships,
Yep.
you're not going to know about that job that's really perfect for you. Or you're not going to know about that job that is horrific because the supervisor turns people over every year because they're the witch
Yep.
from whatever, right? Like that's what networking is about. So it's about relationships.
I took this list from I've done some career work for a long time because it's I don't know, I'm just interested in. So this is the list that I 100% agree with you, Tracy. Yep. And it's like how to reduce the risk of hiring you, get out there and network. That's the best
I'm
thing
laughing.
you can do.
My daughter is 27 and she's been job hunting for the past 4 or 5 months. And I've kept saying to her, why aren't you working your mother's network? You know, I'm networked into the areas you want. I'm here to help you. Mom, that just gives me so much anxiety. Blah, blah, blah. She on and on. I'm like, you should be doing informational interviews. That's where the jobs are going to be surfaced. Blah, blah, blah. She ignored me. I haven't yet said this to her, but she just recently got the job offer. She just recently accepted it. Starts August 4th. A friend of hers referred her to the position. And so I've been waiting to go, slam dunk. I told you it's about network. But I'm trying to like not be the bitch, the mother who's bitchy. Like
You
I
just
have
pull
been
that
telling
you just hold on to that card. You
Oh,
pull
I'm
that out
holding
when you need that. You're like exactly.
it.
No, I have
Yeah.
a young person that I know is starting to, and I keep saying, you know, I'm also very well networked. I'm like, use my network, but I'm like, that's because, yeah,
You want to say to kids, stop bragging about the fact that you uploaded your resume 40 times today.
yeah,
You
no,
wasted 2 hours doing
yeah,
that shit.
yeah. And they don't realize those jobs that are broadcast out there on Indeed, those are going to be to get the most applications versus, I would say 50% of the jobs. People send me all the time. They send me job descriptions. Hey, we're not broadcasting this, but we're looking for this person.
Hello.
And you're not even
Hello.
going to see that. And those jobs are only going to get a small number of applicants. You're going to have a lot
Right.
better chance. But if you're not doing the networking, you're
Well, I
never going to
said
encounter those. Yeah.
back when I was hiring, back in the day when I was at the university and I was the University of Michigan Dearborn,
Hmm.
and I was hiring, and I would say, if I've gotten 20 applications and 5 of them are relatively the same,
Mm-hmm.
when somebody calls me and says, I can vouch for the ethics, the moral, the work ethic of this
Yep.
person over the 5, who do you
Top of
think
the
I'm going to
list.
hire?
Top of the
Hello,
list.
right?
Yep.
Hello. Because the rest of you, I can't verify
Yeah.
that what you said on your resume is actually really true without
Yep.
calling a bunch of right.
It's the risk reduction. It's the same process.
And every time I've hired someone without that referral, I have
Yep.
regretted it.
Yep.
They've conned me in an interview. I've hired them, and then I'm like,
Yep.
right?
Did you know a professor at Michigan Dearborn, Sid Bukowski? I think his first name was Sid,
No.
Sydney. Oh, he was a Jewish studies professor. Anyways, he passed away.
Oh,
His kids are good friends of mine. Anyway, you mentioned you're from Michigan Dearborn, and he taught there years ago.
it
So I thought
was.
you might have
Yeah.
overlapped or something. So no, I appreciate that, Tracy. We're one mind, and you know, I think if people at least would do RFQs, you know, let me send you a quick,
Right.
and you know,
I agree with you.
instead of these long. And this
Stop wasting our
foundation I
time.
mentioned with this webinar, they refuse to do that. They're like, no, we're not going to do that. And it's like you have over 100 people on this webinar because you broadcast it out there. And I
Because
can
you
tell you,
broadcast.
you're only going to hire one of this. And it's like, so you're going to make 100 people, right?
Spend a
Spend
ridiculous
3
amount of time.
hours. So you can choose. It's just like, so Janae and I have gotten really selective in terms of what we respond to.
Right?
Usually our question is like, are we going to learn in responding to this? Are we going to learn something about ourselves or about doing this, or is it going to be edifying? I mean, we just assume we're not going to get it, but the process of doing it is somehow valuable to us. That's one of our criteria for responding.
That's a really great criteria. My husband is in executive sales leadership, and
Mm-hmm.
he has said to me 1,000 times, you must ask if there is a budget. And I'm like, oh, I feel really uncomfortable with that. You must ask if there's a budget because he said if they're not, they're window shopping.
Yep.
Or if it could be anywhere from here to here, he's like, you guys have a higher price point because you guys have PhDs and because you have 40 years of experience. Like, if they're only going to vet, they're only going to, it's a $20,000 thing when it would
Yeah.
really cost 100,000. Like, why are
Yeah.
you applying, if they don't have the budget or whatever? And so I've gotten much more comfortable because of him saying, do you have a budget? If you don't have a budget, go back to the drawing board and figure out what your budget could be and then be honest about it.
There's always a budget, Trace. There's always a budget.
Right.
It's like,
And
why are you playing this game?
Why aren't you willing to say that? Because if you say that, then people are going to scale their response to that. And then you can still bet. You can still decide between.
Yep.
Right?
100%. And some people may be like, you know what? I'll be willing to do more for that money than someone else. And okay, that's the marketplace. But don't waste everyone's time. Yeah. No. And also tell us what the damn problem is. Don't tell me you need a strategic plan. Like, okay, why?
To address what? Right?
Yeah. And they don't like the why question. Oftentimes. Because they jump to the solution and it's more fun to because we don't want to talk about this stuff.
Or we don't want to tell you what's really going on.
Yes. And then you get out, 2 weeks into the process and you're like, oh, okay. And you and I are old enough to know like there's always something.
You need us from the outside to tell your board how screwed up you are. Right? Like, because you've been telling them.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, thanks for joining us, Tracy. Pleasure to meet you.
Well, Janae and I met a while back, and I love supporting what you guys are doing. And it's all about networking. Now you know a little bit, we know each other, and we can always refer to each other. Cool. So good for
We're
you
here,
for doing this.
happy to meet, and let's keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Stay
all right,
safe.
Take care. Yeah, exactly. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
All right.